Welcome, everyone. I'm Jill Baldoff, Associate Dean Alumni Relations from the class of 1981, and I'm thrilled to welcome everyone here to Worldwide Welcome Weeks. This is a typical time when we welcome our newly minted alumni, the class of 2020, into chapters around the world. This year, it's especially important because given the situation with COVID-19, it's important for our alums to be able to mine the full value of their UCLA Alumni Network. So welcome, especially to class of 2020. Today, we're pleased to bring to you three Anderson alums who are CEOs in three very different industries. Ken Varga, class of 91, Tony Ueber, 94, and Yvonne Wassenaar from 1996. Joining the panel as moderator is Professor John Ullmen from the class of 02. Professor Ullmen, it's all yours.
Perfect, thank you, Jill, and welcome everybody, and welcome Tony, Ken, Yvonne. So thrilled to be able to share this time with all of you. And to get started, can I please ask each of our panelists, if you would please say a few words about your organization and how you came to be in your role. And Tony, would you please kick us off?
Sure, thanks, John. Tony Ueber, class of 94. Started my career at P&G and then went to McKinsey. And for the past year and a half, I've been the CEO of 24 Hour Fitness. So we operate 300 full service gyms across the country. Which has been obviously very hard hit by the pandemic, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but wonderful organization that has a mission-driven business, and so happy to be here today. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tony. Ken?
I'm Ken Varga, class of 91, and I'm CEO of Perricone MD, a skincare company that was recently sold to the Hut Group in the UK just a week and a half ago. I've been in the role of CEO since March 2019, and I've been in the beauty, wellness, and personal care space the vast majority of my career. Most recently working for private equity-backed companies, and I started my career in brand management nearly 30 years ago at Procter & Gamble.
Great, thank you. And Yvonne?
Hi, Yvonne Wassenaar, class of 96. I went to Anderson Consulting after business school. All said and done, spent 17 years there before moving into operating roles at VMware, New Relic, Airware, and I'm currently CEO of Puppet. Puppet is an enterprise multi-cloud infrastructure automation company. We work with some of the largest, most critical businesses around the globe, 80% of the Fortune 500. Yeah, excited to be here.
Great, wonderful. And so everyone in the audience, we're on the lookout for questions that you might have for the Q&A segment. And we'll get started here. I'll throw a few questions that are timely and topical to our panelists. And the first one, excuse me, for all our panelists, when you look back on the pandemic, and since March and your response to it, what are your top takeaways, decisions that you've made, how you've made decisions, or maybe how you're handling remote work? How have you adapted as things have kept changing in this pandemic world we've been living in since March? And can we please stay with Yvonne on this question?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. And I think, gosh, 2020 has been a crazy year. And for us, it started with the horrible bushfires in Australia, if people can remember back that long. But with a brother-in-law in China, I think I had some early warning signs around the pandemic. And for us at Puppet, what we realized was there was just an incredible uncertainty in the marketplace. And I believe that it's the role of all of us as leaders to really focus in those types of environments on what I call creating calm perspective and a path forward. And for me, I was actually able to leverage on a lot of what I learned both in business school, but as a strategy consultant. And we heavily utilize scenario analysis to really help us think both about what was going on in the world that would impact us, as well as what might go on financially inside the company. And through doing that, we were able to, one, kind of have transparency for our teams on what mattered and how we were making decisions. Two, get out of the gates quickly with what I call no regret moves. And then three, have a playbook for how the future is unfolded. So for us, using kind of the world scenarios, be it fits and starts or a great new world or a gradual recovery, like thinking about that all the way back in February, March, we now know exactly what we need to do as we see, when a vaccine is going to come or not. Same thing on the financial side on Happy to say in tech, we've exceeded our projections. So we know now where we want to invest incremental money and move quickly.
Terrific. Thank you, Yvonne. And Tony, takeaways from the pandemic era.
There we go. I mean, the pandemic hit our business particularly hard, and it's crazy to think about. It's only been a few months, but back on March 15th, I remember sitting down with my management team. We were having discussions about how do we best ensure a safe environment for our members and team members. And then the next day, literally, we were closing 450 clubs across the country. And, we tried to keep as many people for as long as possible, but we eventually ended up having to furlough 19,500 out of our 20,000 people. And, there's just nothing that you learn in business school or anything you learn over the 30 years that I've been leading organization that prepares you for closing down your entire operation and furloughing nearly 100% of your staff. And then as a result of that, we were forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on June 15th. So we've been managing through not only the pandemic, but we've also been managing through the Chapter 11 process over the past 5 or 6 months. So in addition to what I would call an overdose of flexing our dealing with ambiguity leadership skills, I would point to 2 primary lessons that I want to leave everyone with from the experience that I've had. First, never let a good crisis go to waste. And second, never underestimate the power of culture in your organization. So like I said in my intro, I joined the company in January of 2019, and I ended up replacing the majority of the leadership team over my first 4 months in position, because we were really tasked with transforming a business that had been kind of middling for several years. So at the start of the shutdown, we communicated to the organization that we not only wanted to survive the crisis, but we also wanted to put ourselves in a position to be able to thrive once it was over. So rather than kind of sitting on our hands, we were very aggressive in implementing our actions that we'd already identified prior to the pandemic, and getting things done that it would have taken years to do under normal circumstances. But because of the pandemic and because of the Chapter 11 situation, we were able to execute those things in a matter of weeks. I think the second thing that we did was took advantage of this environment and used Zoom. So we held town halls on a weekly basis where I was communicating with everyone in the organization and making sure that they had a forum to be able to ask questions and engage in really open and honest two-way conversations. And we were very honest with them and providing them with updates on where we stood, what the situation was, what decisions we were making, why we were making those decisions. And I think that really helped us build a tremendous amount of trust, which allowed us to work through this period of incredible uncertainty and a tremendous amount of ambiguity by being very clear with our teams what we were doing and why we were doing it. And it's actually had a lot of real positive benefits for us managing through the crisis, getting things executed faster, and then really having people pull together, in a supportive and trust-based environment. So it's been crazy. You never want to go through Chapter 11. You also don't want to go through a Chapter 11 in the middle of a pandemic. But I really think we're better off and stronger for having gone through both of those experiences.
Thank you, Tony. And Ken, takeaways from the pandemic so far?
I mean, when the pandemic started, I feel like we told people it was still known as coronavirus. And we were looking at our supply chain because we source out of China many things. And so we were starting to look at that as early as December, watching and thinking about what contingencies might be. And it looked like it was going to be fairly nominal for us, really just some supply chains. Maybe we'd air freight some things out of China. But as March started to roll around, things obviously started to change. We had customers like Macy's, Nordstrom, and Ulta announced unilateral moves that they were going to extend payment for purchases from the normal 30 to 60 days out to 90 or even 120 days, which quickly told us that cash preservation was going to be key. And we started focusing on what did we need to do to ensure that we had the optimal amount of cash on hand. By the third week of March, we'd met as a leadership team and we had reforecast our business in its entirety for the next 2 quarters to figure out how we would weather those storms. And I think critical for us also was open conversations with our board at this time, as well as our lenders, to let them know about it and what the impact was on AR. That included an approval to skip a quarterly loan payment from our lenders, which was really critical for us. We also had frank conversations with our suppliers and asked them to extend our AP out to 60 to 75 days to allow us to move through it. And then, of course, you have to look across, as Tony did, with your organization, and we ended up, we froze positions, we, delayed bonus payments, we moved some individuals to part-time, furloughed others, unfortunately had to term some as well. And I took a leadership role by voluntarily taking a pay cut as an example for my leadership team and the company. I think key to this process for us was constant communication, between our board, our customers, our suppliers, and our employees, letting them know what's going on. That was frequently Microsoft Teams calls, email updates, phone calls. My leadership team was doing the same thing, reaching out at a lower level with all their members to see what's going on. And I felt it was important. I personally called about 20. I have a much smaller organization than Tony. I personally called about 20% of the company to see how they were doing, to make sure that I understood what was going on, what were the challenges they were facing as parents, having their kids at home. And, perhaps some of them were even dealing with, elderly parents that they had to deal with. And we also promised them that we would give them a 4-week notice prior to bringing them back in the office so that they could start to relax and feel comfortable that things were going to be okay. And once our crash crunch was over, thankfully, in just about 90 days, we brought employees back to full time. As retail stores opened back up, we were able to bring back our furloughed employees. And we paid back our suppliers and got our AP down to normal terms so they could see that it was just a short-term thing as they worked with us. And I think throughout, keeping internal and external teams abreast of what you are doing keeps everyone focused and engaged, but also takes away some of the surprises or the fear out there. And so I think those were key for us.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ken. And if we could stay with you for the next question for all the panelists about, well, the crisis ignited by the tragic death of George Floyd and, focus on racial justice and diversity and inclusion. How have you dealt with and handled and led in that regard?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was, as we were thinking about this, I read an interview this past week with Miami Heat center Myers Leonard that summed up well how I felt about the situation as it unfolded. He was asked about standing for the national anthem while the rest of his teammates knelt and his respecting the right to protest and equality. And he said, and I'll quote him, "Being a white man from a mainly white community, I haven't been directly impacted by these things, so I have to listen and learn." I think he said that as well as I could at all in that. So one of the first things I did was to try to increase my knowledge on the subject. I realized I was a white man from a mainly white community. Thankfully, there was an Anderson Friday faculty chat on this very subject that proved to be very timely. I took copious notes on the discussion, and I invested the time to read 3 of the books that were mentioned in there, which I found to be helpful. For me, the subject of race, justice, equality, white privilege, and such are not subjects that are easily understood by a tweet or a single blog. They required some study in depth in order to understand the complexity of them. So I don't consider myself a subject expert by any means, but I consider myself much better informed than I was previously, which I think is a key aspect. I also took the time to approach some Black neighbors about the subject and discuss how it was impacting our company. And with their permission, which was key, we had a meaningful and helpful conversation. So I think that was a good first step. As a business, then, we had to concurrently decide what to do in the response to social media blackouts, the pull up or shut up movement that was sweeping the beauty industry. And we met as a leadership team to decide what are we going to do as a predominantly white company that has skincare products that primarily serve white and Asian skincare needs. While 73% of our company is female, with 60% of our leadership roles filled by females, we are underrepresented in BIPOC with only 4% Black and 25% POC. So we had to decide, how do we balance that? And one of the keys we said is we have to do things that we can commit to and execute well. And we were in the middle of the sale process, so we couldn't commit to long-term things that potentially a buyer would not be agreeable to. So we said, let's work on what we know is consistent with our values. So we committed to increasing the diversity in our social media content and the influencers we worked with. We made a public statement about our unequivocal support of the Black community and made donations to causes consistent with our core values, like empowerment. So we supported the National Urban League, and then supporting our community with Black Girls Code in the San Francisco area. We also discussed these steps with our employees and reiterated a commitment to living our values, which I think was a critical piece as well. And one that came out of left field at this time was one of the blogs out there in beauty accused us of laying off people of color to protect white employees, which was nothing, could not be the truth at all. 85% of the people we let off were white and things, but you have to deal with those things. You have to have them, and they're not always easy conversations and actions to take, but nevertheless, we felt that they were ones that were overdue and needed to be taken.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate it, Ken. And Tony, could we go to you next on this question?
Sure. So, interestingly, one of the first things I did when I came on board in January of last year was to hire somebody to head up our corporate affairs department and really create a corporate social responsibility platform that included, diversity and inclusion as one of those elements. And we were making really good progress on that. And then, the crisis hit. We shut down all our clubs, and we made a huge mistake in retrospect. And we put all that work on hold, and we just stopped it. And it was part of, prioritization and justification for why that was no longer a priority in the midst of a crisis. And like I said, it proved that that was a big mistake, because when the George Floyd tragedy hit, unfortunately, we'd lost ground and we'd lost some momentum. We ended up having a town hall meeting again via Zoom with everyone in the organization. It was the most open, honest, raw, emotional conversation I've ever been in my career, in a room with that many people, not in a room, but in a virtual setting. And I was so impressed by the courage that so many of our team members showed across all levels of the organization in stepping forward and offering their point of view and providing their perspective, and other people providing, other perspectives or viewpoints or asking questions. And it was a real catalyst for us to say, hey, we need to make this a priority again going forward. We launched into action. We implemented unconscious bias training across the organization. We asked for volunteers to create a diversity council, which is, a bit of, just a baseline move in this regard. And we had an overwhelming response to that. So we actually ended up doing something that I thought was pretty interesting, and creating a two-tiered approach where we had a diversity council, diversity inclusion council, which was a smaller group of people charged with leading the effort. But then we had what we called the diversity and inclusion interest group that allowed anyone that wanted to be involved to be able to participate and take some responsibility and accountability and have their voices heard. And we've made a lot of progress since then, and implemented a lot of other tangible elements. And I think really a crossroads for us is, somewhat you're taught in business to, play down the middle, be Switzerland, not take sides, and, not offend anyone, on either side of the debate. And you just can't do that anymore. And businesses have to step forward, choose a position, and lead from the front, and not play it safe. And I think that was the biggest discussion that I had with my management team We did bring in someone with deep expertise in the area to help consult with us and help be a guidepost for us in this process and in this journey. But we've really made the choice to not sit on the fence or play it safe, but to really adopt being allies for social justice and social change, and making more definitive statements and taking definitive actions on that front, and really making our position known and standing behind that, and then not having it be just a separate initiative, which frankly it was to some extent, even in the work that we did prior to the shutdown, and which I believe it probably is in most organizations, and to really integrate it into the fabric of our culture and our operations, and make it part of who we are as opposed to a separate initiative. Now, that's not going to happen quickly, for sure, and I think we all recognize that and recognize the level of work that it's going to take to get there. But you have to have that vision, and you have to create those distinctions that we're really going to get behind this. We're never going to put it on hold because we've got a crisis happening in the business, because it's just critically important to who we are and who we want to be going forward. So that was really the transformation, I think, that was made inside of our organization over the past several months as it relates to our team members and then the communities that we serve.
Great, thank you, Tony. And Yvonne, how have you responded?
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Tony and Ken said. I think, it all has to start with education, and everybody's on a different part of that journey. And you should never assume where anybody is starting or how far they've gone or how willing they are to go on the journey. What I would say is, when this all happened, for me, there were two really important things I had to figure out. First and foremost was, as CEO of a relatively meaningful sized company, what was the company going to say versus what was I going to say? And it sounds pretty straightforward, but it's not really, in the sense that at Puppet we have strong values for human rights, and there was a big media to do when one of our competitors was found to be doing business with ICE. And there was a lot of concern. We've got an open source space. There was a lot of community cry, and thankfully we weren't doing any commercial work with them, but we did write down and share, and we continue to share with our teams, what is our human rights policy? Who will we and will we not sell commercial product to? We have a strong set of values around diversity. We have a strong set of values around inclusion. And what's interesting when you put that all together is, if you're going to have an inclusive environment, that means that as CEO, I have to make space for ideas that aren't my own. But I also have to uphold these core values of human right and diversity and so forth. So I started out and I wrote a personal blog on my LinkedIn, because that could come from me and my voice. And later that day, it was a Saturday, I realized that we had to say something as a company. It was in alignment, to Tony's point. We couldn't sit by the sidelines. And we had a lot of internal discussion over that weekend, and we decided to put a statement on our website that said, we stand with the Black community. And I told my PR team, before we put anything on the website that says that, we have to define, what does that mean? And we came up with a whole series of actions that meant, both reinforcing things that we had done, but also taking new actions, really around, advocating for change and legislation around what we were doing with our own workforce, around where we were donating money and time. We give 4 community service days a year, being very explicit that if people wanted to protest, they could use that time to protest. So we did all of that. But the second thing that I spent a lot of time thinking about is, what can I personally do? Because similar to Tony, we did an all hands as this was going on, and people could submit questions through Slack. And it was probably one of the hardest, most emotionally raw and vulnerable times I've had to be. Some people were suggesting that, Yvonne, are you a racist because you're not calling for the defunding of police from puppet perspective? And, I had to answer that and say, to me, what my objective is to create space for people to look for the right solutions for the problem. But that I knew there were people in the company who had family members in the police force. There's a personal choice and level there. And some people asked, did that mean I was racist? And I said, well, I think inherently by being white, I am, based on how I define that word. And so I came about and said, what can I personally do to make a difference? And, like I said, we care a lot about diversity. I'd done a fair amount in my tenure at Puppet, which is coming up on 2 years, on gender diversity, not enough on racial diversity. But who do I hire? I don't hire everybody in the company, but I do hire the executives. I do hire the board. And so in the coming weeks, I'm very proud to say that we'll be adding some great expertise and leadership to our board, but also further racially diversifying our board. And I think things like that, starting with people in positions of power to help us identify our blind spots. We've hired a consultant to help us identify where we have systemic racism within the company. A lot of HR policies feel good and they seem good, but even things like referral bonuses, if you're a predominantly white company, your network is predominantly white, most likely. So how do you think about switching that? So a lot of deep thought. We're not perfect. I'm proud of what we've done. But I will say the pandemic was hard, but that was a little bit more textbook on how you navigate that. I think echoing what Tony and Ken said, as a white leader, it was a lot more difficult to really figure out what was the right way to create space and drive change.
Thank you, Yvonne. And all of you, as we look forward, through the end of the year and into next year, how are you preparing yourself and your organization for the uncertainty ahead? And let's see, Tony, can we go to you first for this one?
Sure. I mean, I would hopefully it's not as much ambiguity and uncertainty next year as it's been this year. It's hard to imagine that, but we're a gym business. I would say I feel like now we're a lean, mean fighting machine coming out of the year that we've had from really the two fronts that I talked about before. One, operationally, and the changes and transformation we've been able to make there. Taking some advantage of the crisis to be able to accelerate our change efforts, and then pulling together as a team through a crisis. Just the frankness of communication, the openness, the honesty, the transparency, the trust that's built, I think is going to make us a much stronger competitor going forward. And I feel much more confident in our ability to be able to handle whatever adversity comes our way. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is lobby the government of California. In fact, I've got a conversation later this afternoon with the top public health officials for the state of California, because we need to advocate on behalf of the importance of health and fitness, and making sure that people have access to the ability to stay fit and healthy, which has never been more important than it is in the current environment with which we're all dealing with. So, that's a big issue for us that's still out there that we hope to get some movement on. But, I personally feel very good about where we are as an organization. Having come through the level of adversity that we have will make us a much stronger company and competitor, and a much better advocate for social change going forward, which is required and also equally as important.
Thank you, Tony. And Yvonne, looking into the future, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really excited to explore the power of possibility. I think Tony hit on it a little bit. Out of never let a good crisis go to waste, we've had a lot. And to me, I think it's driven, one, a heightened understanding of some of the challenges that we have societally that we all need to be thinking about how do we address in terms of the digital divide and systemic racism and so forth. But we're also seeing a mass acceleration of some really important trends that I think open up great possibility. So work from home. Work from home isn't necessarily great now because a lot of people have kids who aren't in school and they can't travel and they can't have a normal life. But think about the possibility when you can have a more hybrid workforce and what that can mean for diversity and inclusion and work-life balance and, you know, choice of where you want to live. Think about, you know, medicine and education, just the ability to create greater economic access to incredible education. I'm sure all of you, similar to me, have done virtual doctor visits now. And particularly if you think about things like, you know, mental health, I think an area that we've, you know, neglected and we're going to see a lot of impacts coming out of the ability to have virtual engagement makes it more economical, more accessible. So I think there's a whole new way of doing things. And for me, both personally and professionally, I'm really looking at seeing, you know, where the dust settles. You know, there is going to be a change in behavior because the pandemic has gone on for so long. And then being able to really capitalize on those new opportunities. And, you know, as a tech company, I believe a lot of the acceleration of digitization is going to bring a need for more thinking around security and compliance and the like. And that's what our company focuses on. And so looking for how we can best help our customers address those challenges and continue to innovate.
Thank you, Yvonne. And then Ken, managing the uncertainty in the future.
Yeah, certainly we are facing some uncertainty as we changed ownership. We were finishing a process there and then we just exited that and moving into a transition phase. And knowing that that was upon us and not knowing what our new owners would desire, one of the things that I determined was I needed to have a TTM, or, you know, trailing 12 months analysis by the team of what's going on, what's working, what's not, what do we see? Because while I believe our guts are pretty good, Tony would say our guts are probably a little too large at the moment. You know, we need to have data to help support what it is we're doing. And I'm not calling for paralysis, you know, by analysis, but moving beyond and seeing what the data is sometimes whispering and sometimes screaming at us that we are better prepared for the next conversations. You know, one of the things that we saw is retail isn't dead. You know, our D2C business is very strong, but retail isn't dead. But we need to be prepared to tap into the strengths of what makes each work and decide what is going to be gone and not come back and what is going to, you know, stick around. I think one good example from my industry are in-store testers. So most of the women out there are probably familiar with it. You know, you could try out a cosmetic product or a skincare product. Certainly that is not the most hygienic, even if you were using, you know, the Q-tip there. And so I think that's probably gone forever. That is changed and won't be coming back. That's something we spent millions of dollars a year on supporting. So what do I do with that? How do I get that experience back in? Certainly, I think online offers some of that from a sampling standpoint. We're going to be able to address that, and that will happen. But I also then said, well, what do I do about my field teams, which can't go into stores when they were initially furloughed, and now they're allowed back in. They're allowed back in only a certain number of days a week. What do I do with these well-trained individuals? And the answer is leverage them and use the technologies together. So the fact that these individuals couldn't go into stores on a daily basis, I said, well, what can we do with them? We started one-on-one consultations online with some of the most educated, experienced individuals we have in the company. You know, in the past, if they spent a day in an Ulta or Sephora, they may help to impact $2,000, $4,000 worth of sales. You know, this is an outlier, but on one of the first days, one of the field reps sold $1,300 to one individual in a one-on-one consultation. I think that ability to bring it home and bring it to life is a strength that we have, and perhaps we wouldn't have realized that we had that if the pandemic hadn't forced this upon us to say, how do you look differently? How do you look at the strong assets you have and see where the future might be taking us in there? So I think that's an opportunity that could explode exponentially for us. You know, I think from data-driven decisions to embracing change and finding what that new normal is going to be. It's not going to be the old normal. It's going to be a new normal. I think it could, in many cases, it could be a better normal, and being prepared for that. Say, you know what, this is okay. It is a better normal. You know, as Tony said, take advantage of a situation and accelerate change. So I think there's a lot to look forward to, and I think truly the future is bright.
Great. Thank you, Ken. And so a couple questions have, and this is for any or all of the panelists, a couple questions have come in from the audience. And thank you, by the way, and please keep those questions coming, as you may want to do in the Q&A box. A couple questions about in-person and remote work for any or all the panelists. And Olivia asks, curious about your view, specifically in each of your organizations, about the long-term need for in-person collaboration, internal and external meetings, versus the efficiency and flexibility of virtual collaboration. And then maybe in the same space, broad space of in-person versus virtual, Allison asks, what adjustments are you making to what your workplace will look like in the midterm? For example, balance between work from home, work from office. So thoughts on in-person and virtual work, collaboration or otherwise?
Sure, I can jump in. And I think one of the panelists said it before. I mean, this has changed work forever. We're not going back. You know, these tools all existed prior to the pandemic, but this has been such a violent forcing mechanism to make people figure out how to utilize these tools. And it's been so comprehensive across organizations and industries that this is here to stay, I think. And it's proven in our organization to, you know, obviously then come along with some advantages and some disadvantages. Certainly you lose, you know, the power of impersonal connection and communication and water cooler conversations and just, you know, stopping by the office or the cubicle conversations. But in some ways it's much more efficient, and it's much more efficient to reach a broader part of the organization. Just like I was saying before, being able to have 500 or 600 people on a call once a week. I actually think the organization knows me better personally now through using that tool than they did if we were just trying to organize that on a quarterly basis, where we could find a big enough facility to be able to house all those people in person. So I think there's some real advantages and some real benefits to us. We have 2 corporate offices. We're currently looking for new space because we believe we're going to downsize, so we don't need to be spending money on rent. That's money that can be spent in other parts of our business. And I also think this is will open up our ability to attract talent, because now, you know, you're not restricted to where your corporate headquarters are. You're not looking for you know, people that are willing to relocate, and you're able to, you know, I think going forward, look for the best talent wherever the person resides and figure out a way to be able to make it work that works for that individual and also works for the company, to ensure that you've got absolutely the best talent in your organization possible. And to me, that's going to be the biggest benefit going forward for companies that are really able to take advantage of what's going to be the new normal in the workplace.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I can add on to that, I agree with everything that Tony said around access to talent and flexibility. The 2 thoughts I'd add to that, one is, you know, as a technologist and being in this industry for 30 years, you know, what's interesting is the very first thing we try to do with technology is replicate what it's replacing. And so the very first thing that we've tried to do with Zoom and all these other video, like we've tried to replicate the office as it was. And that's a very natural way that you think about it. Like when cell phones first came out, they were to do phone calls, and people would still schedule phone calls, and they'd try to be somewhere where they had good cell reception. And all of a sudden you realize that there's whole new degrees of freedom. So I think we're going to start seeing the technology at hand, the collaboration tools, the avatars, the whole switch in how you get really a hybrid environment that creates a richer, much more fulfilling experience that gets us the benefits and minimizes some of the the downsides over time. I think about, Ken's industry where you can, do, skin diagnostic and stuff over the internet. Just there's fascinating things that we can do. So I think that's one part when I think about the experience is that, in the near term, we're gonna have a hybrid remote office. I do think there's value in having community gathering spaces and to have a space in a community. We're in 6 different cities around the globe and we do work out of them with the community. Those things I think are important to us culturally, but the engagement style changes. The second thing that I'd say is there's so many benefits that have been opened up. We do a lot of engagement with our open source community, with our prospects and our customers through conferences and events. And I was talking to my CTO last night. He's like, Yvonne, this is crazy. He goes, I keynoted the Australia event and I'm keynoting the Singapore event. And normally that would have taken 2 weeks out of my life. And now I'm able to go to these events and engage with these people in real meaningful ways without that. And we have our participation rates are through the roof. It's because it's easier to actually do that. You don't have to travel. You don't have to spend all that money. You can do things differently. And so to me, I think we're just on the cusp of rethinking the possible. And so we're painting through trying to replicate life as we knew it through Zoom. But this is going on long enough that I think we'll see some real innovation and creativity that allows us to get to some pretty exciting spots.
I'll just add one quick thought, which is as a father of 6 children who are now out of the house, I think I am fairly sensitive to the family needs. And I think that has increased across our organization is that what is the balance? How do you do that? And working in San Francisco, which is primarily a commuter city where people use public transportation, recognizing that there are legitimate concerns and legitimate fears and also saying, how important it is that that individual who's coming from an hour and a half out into the city for them to do that every day. We were already set up to allow people to work from home. Everyone had laptops and such, for 1 to 2 days a week. But we're definitely looking at it and saying, what is that optimal mix given the unique concerns that everyone has? And I think as an organizational leadership team, we're much more open and much more sensitive to that, especially since many of them are going through it themselves.
Great, thank you all. And so Tony, a question for you coming from David. And how do you make members not feel like they've lost money during this time and want to come back to the gyms?
Well, we didn't charge members while we were closed, which was part of the issue that forced us into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I think what we've been trying to do is stay connected to our members. And one of the forcing mechanisms here has been accelerating our development of our online offerings through our 24Go app. And so again, that really forced us to hit the accelerator on that. Again, kind of invention through necessity and crisis. And so, going forward, we really want to create more of a, an omni-channel environment for our members so we can support their needs, wherever, whenever, and however they want to work out through either in-person experiences in the clubs or supporting them through online mechanisms through our app. And, I think we made all of that stuff free. We were charging for some of those elements. We've added a lot of premium content, and we want to make sure that people are staying in shape, because we just believe so much in the power and the importance of exercise that for us over the past several months, it's really been about trying to keep that connection to our members, do the right thing for our members, and provide them with avenue and access to stay on their fitness journey. Because, my personal opinion is it's all habit, and even for someone that's spent every day or week of their life doing it, once you get out of the habit and the routine, it's hard to get back into it. And so we've been trying to stay as connected as we can, even though we haven't been physically connected to our members over this time period.
Thank you. And Yvonne, a question for you coming in from Michelle. How have your experiences as a female CEO in the tech industry influenced how you lead and support diversity in tech?
It's interesting. for me to think about the diversity and inclusion question, in large part because going through school in the first, I'd say 10, 15 years of my career, I never thought about it much. I worked hard. I worked in a very male-dominated industry, but I didn't really notice. And as I got higher in the executive ranks, what opened my eyes to the challenges in the industry really were the inequities that I saw happening in terms of who got promoted, who got what assignments, what people would ask for. And what I started to realize was it wasn't that we were trying not to be fair and inclusive and let everybody deliver at their highest potential, but that there were situational environmental things that were causing it to happen. And I think my personal kind of poignant story is when I was prompted by my peers to take on a bigger role, and I went to my boss and I said, hey, I think I'd be great taking on this broader scope. Here's all the reasons why. And he said, Yvonne, I think you do an amazing job, but you already work so hard and you have 3 young kids. And for me, what was interesting is if he hadn't said he thought I would do a good job, I probably would have walked away and been like, oh, I guess I'm just not ready. But because he had the honesty and transparency to tell me why, I could turn around and say, hey, I appreciate that. Would you say this to anyone else on your staff who were all men? No. Well, I'm a grown woman. I'm a damn good mother. And now if you don't give it to me, I'm quitting. I got the job. But it really made me get into the research behind it, because this is still one of my best sponsors and mentors. And I went to the Clayman Institute at Stanford because I was working up in Palo Alto. And I dug deep into unconscious bias. And I believe the vast majority of people in tech are good people who want to do good things, but there's a lot we have to learn on how we create environments. So I think for me, as a leadership standpoint, as I look at the issues of systemic racism, there's a lot of crossover learnings. There's a lot of things that are different. But I think for me, it goes back to what Ken and Tony said. We all need to get smarter. We need to go into things open-minded. We need to extend our networks. And I think as a leader, I really try to bring those values to create environments where people can speak up and have their voices heard. And I do a lot to build out my networks in what would be seemingly unnatural places so that I can do what others did for me, pull people up and push people. Because one thing you'll find when you're working with folks who are in the minority, they tend to be risk adverse. And so they often need a little bit more. They often need that extra confidence or that extra, you can do this, to get to where they need to go. Great.
And thank you, Yvonne. I think a question from Preeti is there's a really nice follow-up to that, and this for all of our panelists, or any or all of our panelists. Folks are thinking about career and career paths, and advice from you all about how does one continue to grow their career during the pandemic.
I'll take a quick crack at that. I think keeping in contact and developing a mentor, right? And so ideally you've developed someone that you can reach out to. And I think of someone who's been very important to me over the years and helped me grow along the way. I think it starts with respect and willing to listen and things. So I think about this individual, Ron, who I consider a great friend. We're at complete opposite ends of the political spectrum. Has nothing to do with it. We both want to win in the marketplace and succeed at what we're doing and respect each other and are able to have great conversations. So I'd encourage people to find that individual or more who can help you grow and work with them. Keep in contact. I still text them. We have phone calls. We do things through email. Find those individuals, then turn around and do the same when you have that opportunity. Help other people out there, and don't be afraid to let them know that they have that opportunity to grow. So I think that if you're in a leadership position, that's incumbent upon you to say something. I took one of my senior individuals and I told him, I said, you're not speaking up enough in our leadership team meetings. You have things to say which are valuable, and by not saying them in this forum, you are robbing us of your knowledge and things. And he started doing that, and he appreciated it. I think sometimes we shy away from those conversations because they can feel uncomfortable or we want to be friends with people. We can still do both. We can have uncomfortable conversations, be friends, you know, working together, having honest conversations, looking to talk to more people and find that mentor, I think is going to be a critical one. Someone that can help you to grow and wants to do so.
I'd just quickly add on to what Ken said. I think that was a great answer. The couple words of wisdom I have, one is be intentional about your career. Nobody's gonna, you know, do it for you. The company's gonna get whatever they can out of you. So have a plan and always be looking at, you know, what did my experience get me up to now? And I always talk about portfolios of opportunities. If I had stayed at Accenture for 25 years, I would have had fewer, not more career opportunities. Even leaving after 17, I was limiting what I could do next. So always be looking at, you know, if I do this same thing for another year or two, am I growing my opportunities or am I pulling them back or getting kind of more siloed? The second thing I would say is network. And, you know, yeah, it's a pandemic, but it's amazing how you can network, create personal connections, refresh old ones, go out to LinkedIn. The vast majority of opportunities that come your way will come through your network. It is amazing to me. And if I say there's something I would tell my younger self, I would have started networking before I was, you know, 39 years old. It's super, super important. And again, I think, you know, if you're, what one of my friends told me is, Yvonne, you're one of the smartest people I know, but nobody knows who you are, so it's meaningless. You eat lunch at your desk. And he was right. I'm like, I've got 3 young kids and I'm eating lunch at my desk because I'm trying to do it all. Realize that part of your job, particularly at more senior levels, is who do you know? Who can you bring in? Who can you recruit? Who can you ask for help? Who can you do partnerships with? So those would be my 2 adds to what Ken said.
Great, thank you. And Tony, a question for you specifically, and then another question that it's in the same category. Let's say I think it's applicable for all our panelists. So we'll start with you, Tony. Do you look for options? Do you look at options like Peloton business model, or the latest Nike or Adidas virtual solutions for fitness? And another question that's broader, applicable for all. Thoughts about company growth strategies that will help us through the pandemic and beyond? Is it possible to think optimistically, be growth oriented, experiences in terms of how do we not just survive but thrive and grow going forward? So Tony, can you get us started on that one? Peloton, Nike, Adidas, or other virtual solutions?
No, I mean, I think the principle there is just, you know, how narrowly are you defining your business, and how forward thinking are you in the disruptors to your business? So I wasn't in this business or this industry prior to this role. One of my questions when coming in is, well, why weren't we the ones that were thinking or innovating or developing a Peloton-like solution? And partly it's because you get so myopically focused on executing the business that you have as opposed to the business that you could have, that you end up missing opportunities, and then more innovative companies come along and innovate and deposition you. And so I think it's really important to take a broader viewpoint of who you are, what products and services are you offering, and who is your customer and what do they need. So and then also understanding what are your core competencies and what are you capable of. So we're certainly taking a much more holistic view of things going forward. Like I said, we've got a lot of development effort in our online and through our app, as opposed to just, you know, in the clubs. Nothing, I don't think anything will ever replace the need to come into a gym. Nobody has the equipment that we have. There's a community and a social aspect to it as well, and there's an expertise aspect from our fitness professionals inside the club. But it's important to be able to adapt and be able to meet your customers where they are and offer them what they need. So, you know, part of our strategy going forward won't necessarily be to invent some of those things, because we're just, as a large company with a long history of doing kind of the same thing over and over again, we're going to need to look outside for partners to help us on some of those fronts. Smaller companies that have been more innovative because they're not saddled with some of the legacy elements that we may be. And so we've got several partnerships in the works that will help us to expand the scope of our product and service offerings and really create that comprehensive approach to fitness that we're looking to deliver for our members.
Great, thanks. And as we turn to the other panelists on that, I'm noticing, and thank you, Jose, excuse me, for that question. I see Jeanette has perhaps even a suggestion here, extending workouts to outdoors. Would love for 24 hours to have a weekly bicycle ride. Great to meet people, be outside, learn about cycling and so forth. Any real quick thoughts on that, Tony? Or
No, I think it's a great idea. I mean, unfortunately, we've had to move outside just to keep some of our operations open. But I'm a big cyclist myself. I go out with the group all the time. So I think it's an outstanding idea. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And other panelists, Yvonne, maybe also a cyclist. I see you got these really cool bicycle bookends.
Oh, yeah.
But thoughts on growth and how to thrive and perhaps even grow in this environment?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things building on what Tony said. One is, it's important to understand where you are from a runway and a financial perspective. And it's different if you're a public company versus if you're a private company like Puppet. So for us, we're a venture-backed company. We're 100 million in annual recurring revenue, so we're big, but cash is king. And so the first thing that you want to do is be in a position where you control your own destiny. So for us, going into the pandemic, we made some very thoughtful, changes to our business, accelerating some things. Unfortunately, we needed to let some people go. But we put ourselves in a position where I always joke, when you don't need money is when people give you money, where we were able to bring an incremental 40 million in. And now, while I'm seeing some of my competitors get picked up, we're in a power position because we control our own destiny. So the first thing is make sure that you have that runway, you can see where you're going. And the second thing is, I think, kind of keying on what Tony said, is you have to be agile in how you think. You have to be willing to break down your limiting beliefs and be more creative around what is possible. And I think in times like this, heightening your ability to listen, heightening your ability to question your own core beliefs and to reimagine what is possible is super important. So this is why you want diverse teams. You want to go from people who are, executing, who are going to help you get that financial runway, to the people who are the dreamers and the visionaries. And then you want to be able to kind of pilot and test and, test a bunch of things in an agile way. So we personally at Puppet take a lot of technology principles like DevOps and Agile and apply them to how we run our business to be able to adapt and pivot and shift quickly.
Thank you. And Ken, thoughts on that? If no worries, if not.
No, I think those are covering it, pretty well.
Fantastic. All right, and we're coming up on with just a few minutes left, and so a couple of questions. We'll go in the. I think we might have time for two if we're have tight turnarounds on these two questions. And a question I think that's broadly applicable here, and Ken, if we can have your thoughts. Perhaps first, when you have to have these tough conversations with folks these days, right? How do you balance communicating with your employees about, this is Curtis, thank you, Curtis, balance with your communicating with your employees about harsh realities on the ground, emphasizing with those realities what they mean for their life and so forth, with your ability and need to have a bigger picture focus and optimism about the medium and longer term. So communicating harsh realities and being empathetic and having the bigger picture perspective. Thoughts on that, Ken?
I think those are always hard conversations, right? Especially when you're dealing with someone, if you're saying, I have to let you go, or I have to decrease your hours, or you're going to have to be on furlough, right? Those are not easy ones because the financial impacts of them as well. And in our case, I mean, we were a company of about 100 employees. I knew everyone. Didn't have the same 19,000 employee issue, but when you know people, you've interacted with them, in the kitchen, the water cooler, just around their desks, those make them harder. But at the same time, I think it makes them a little bit easier, and they know you, they've seen you, then you're real. And if you're able to come across as being real in your everyday life, I think that makes those conversations easier. I think if you've had, probably most of us have had some experiences which have set us back or diverted us. And so being able to draw on your own personal experiences to be able to offer empathy in a way that is very real, I think is important. And as an organization, as I indicated, keeping the picture going forward, we celebrated the successes. We said, hey, this is going well, and we're being successful, and we let people know about those so that it became an important aspect. And as I indicated, fortunately we're able to bring everything kind of full circle within about 90 days. And that was critical for people to say, okay, it was just a little, period of time and we communicated cleanly with them throughout.
Great, thank you. And Tony or Yvonne, really quick thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would just say I've been a big believer of this throughout my entire career. You need to treat people in the organization like adults and be very direct and honest with them and provide them with as much transparency as you can. Obviously, there's some things that can't be shared broadly in an organization, but I've always found that to be critically important, because if you don't, people will fill in the gaps with the worst possible potential outcomes or the worst possible inferences or data and jump to and reach the wrong conclusions. I mean, I'm reminded of one experience I had in a previous CEO role, and we were doing so well, and we were, constantly presenting our financial results to the organization and where we were versus bonus. And, 1 month we didn't do it just because we had a full agenda. And, it was kind of getting boring to present the good news like that all the time. And people were up in arms because they thought something must be wrong. And there's something that the company, has happened to the company. So it was just a good reminder that, you really need to communicate clearly with folks in your organization. And that's probably been the biggest balancing act I've had this past several months, is being able to deliver, difficult news and hard news, but doing it in a very respectful way, and then also balancing that and then balancing it with audiences with what the future looks like and the positivity that I see going forward, and the impact of the hard changes and tough decisions that we're making now are going to have going forward. But unfortunately, not everyone will be a beneficiary of that, and not everyone that stays is going to have friends or colleagues who haven't stayed and aren't going to be beneficiaries of that. So it's really a tough balancing act. I think we need to be honest with people and about everything, about the situation, and being honest with them about what we see as the future. And if the future is bright and optimistic, being direct about that at the same time that you're delivering difficult news. And people, if you're honest with them over time, that trust will build and they will believe what you're saying.
Great, thank you, Tony. And we're on the hour. Yvonne, final thoughts, final words. You got the final word.
Yeah, I would just say, in times like this, when there's so much, challenge that's going on and all these things we say we want to change, I always like the short quote from Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world, take self-responsibility and look at what's in your sphere of control. And I think if we all do that, then we're destined to end up in a better spot.
Great. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Jill.
That was just the perfect ending, Yvonne. Thank you so very, very much. We're at the end of our time today, and I want to thank Tony, Ken, Yvonne, and John. Thank you for spending this hour with us. A huge shout out to the Alumni Network leaders for promoting this event in your chapters. And of course, a hearty welcome to our newly minted Anderson alums from the class of 2020. We look forward to seeing you at other Worldwide Welcome Week events this month. And I think this slide shows all the different events that you can register for. Thank you again. It was a great, great afternoon.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.